So good afternoon, everyone. This is a great music going on, but I think we have something more exciting. We have a very interesting topic. It's accelerate data-driven value with data governance by business and for the business. I think with the advent there's a lot of talk going on about federated governance and how it empowers or it can empower business users to accelerate their journey of or reduce the time to market for the data products. And we have today with us Damon Buono from Microsoft and Tim Ward from CluedIn. Just a couple of words about Damon. Damon is a daring leader in Microsoft who founded the Microsoft's internal data governance practice. He has been in Microsoft for over 25 years, part of multiple engagements related to data, big data policies. So a very interesting opportunity to learn from him. And Tim comes from CluedIn. He has been in the tech space and comes from knowledge management. He flew in from Australia. Tim, so welcome, and I hope you're not jet lagged.
I'm sleeping halfway through the presentation, yeah.
Yeah, so the way we are going to have this, we have an hour. We'll start with the presentation, and we'll take the questions towards the end of the presentation. We have a lot of participants virtually also, so I'll mediate the questions and I'll bring to you. So welcome, Damon and Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I think we're going to do today's session 20 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of discussion and talk with you, share some learnings. Tim's going to do some as well, and then we'll leave the last 20 minutes for everyone to ask questions, both online as well as in the room, and then we can have someone help us moderate, making sure we cover everybody. But thank you all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending where you're at in the world. My name is Damon Buono, as it was just mentioned here, and I run Microsoft's Enterprise Data Governance function. I'm the founder and current leader of that function, and I'm here today to share a little bit about our journey and also how we're moving in the direction of data governance for the business and by the business, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. And so with that, let me start with this slide. So this is one of my favorite slides, and I use this to describe the importance of understanding how data governance is in the context of all the other data investments each one of us make or our organizations make. And as this title says, what's preventing you from realizing the value of your data investments? We all know about the investments on the top. It's the promise we're going to get about digital transformation. We invest in data lakes and data lake warehouses. We hire data scientist teams. Microsoft hired, just as an example, we hired 40,000 people in the last couple of years. 10,000 are data scientists. How do you get a group of data scientists that big to realize the value of your investments when they're, by the way, during the pandemic, and they had never met anyone live and tried to understand those organizations? That's the kind of stuff you're sitting up on top. But the most important part here is the stuff on the bottom, or just as equally as important, around what I call the inhibitors. Or another way of saying it, these are all the thinly veiled data governance questions organizations need to ask themselves to say, to achieve the value of the things above the line, you also need to do the things below the line. Things like understanding your legacy data estate. Understanding who your data owners are. If I had a quarter for every time I've talked to someone in the business, and I've been doing this for data governance for 4 years at Microsoft, it said, who owns the data? And I get the business people to say, we're just users of the data, IT owns it. And you go to the IT organization and say, we just host the data, over there is the business. And you did get this cross thing goes like this, well, who owns the data? If no one can identify who owns the data, how about I delete it? And you get this look. That's an example, thinly veiled data governance question. Enterprise data quality problems, one of my favorite, the tribal knowledge data discovery. Imagine that new employee that we just talked about a second ago, trying to understand how to find something like Azure consumed revenue. One of the most important metrics at the company, when there isn't a database called Azure consumed revenue, there isn't a database called revenue. In fact, it's called something else. But how would you know that? Those are examples of the thinly veiled data governance questions that each of us grapple. We had the exact same problems at Microsoft. So let me start going a little bit about our journey. And I've lived this along the way. This is actually a slide that I presented to our leaders in 2017 to talk and give a little bit of familiarity with data governance. Because at Microsoft, and it's true, governance is kind of a bad word. Governance means going slow. Governance means process. It means controls. And in an industry that only respects innovation and speed, governance is a little bit of a threat. But it's really important how you frame it. And I framed it in terms of responsible data democratization. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But I wanted to give people familiarity with data governance in our journey. We've done this before. And at that time, when we were positioning this GDPR, I was super involved with the GDPR program at the company. And to say, you know, that's a data program. And previous to that, we had security, get secure initiatives. And so, for example, you guys have seen this, or how many patches that Microsoft produced. That's the result of internal get secure initiatives. We have done data governance before. We just didn't call it that, which actually led us to our first phase of our journey. And I don't think I could have changed it and made it do it any other way, but this was effectively data governance list management. And it was no joke, we had a list of issues. I started with 9 and eventually ended with 137 data issues. Each data issue were enterprise in nature. So these are the things where marketing needed sales to do something, or sales needed HR to do something, things that only came together at the top of our organization, the CEO. So they naturally festered in the organization for years. Again, thinly veiled data governance questions, so people didn't know it. Turns out, the reason people didn't know it is because every organization has a BI department, I don't know how many people identify with that, who have anywhere between 7 and 200 data analysts who shield the problems from leaders. So when you go back and tell the same leaders, hey, we have a data governance problem, they're saying, what are you talking about? So prove it. So that's what we ended up doing. I did that for 2 years. And again, I'm proud of the work that we did, but I affectionately called it the whack-a-mole project, because for every one issue we put down, 4 more would pop up, and I'm sure that there was more than 137. But after 2 years, I remember our executive vice president of the company said, finally, he goes, Damon, I finally get it. This is reactive. This is whack-a-mole. What can we do to be proactive, or data governance by design, which is something I had originally positioned, and the organization wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. And that actually led us to phase 2 of our journey, which is all about proactive data governance, or I would call it sort of data health. We actually started doing things like taking and scanning the data estate, trying to put measures in place around, is it healthy? Does it have an owner? Do we have taxonomy defined? Does it have a term assigned? Does it actually have a good name? Does it have a good description? Very, very simple measures in place here. But what I did is I wanted to make sure that I'm no longer at the spotlight on data governance to say, what is it you guys do? Put the spotlight back in the organizations. And so I took every data asset, we measured them, and I mapped them to CVPs at the organization, and then I color-coded them, stoplight reports. And so it went from a conversation of where is the data, and is it healthy, to I know your data is unhealthy, but I know your data is okay. And it played a little bit of the gamification, because no one wants to be read at Microsoft. And so that was phase 2 of our journey. And that's good. We got to a point where we had a whole bunch of data assets that we've measured and managed in the physical data state. But you know what? We've now gotten to the point now where the data state is so large, we want to get the business involved. And so that's phase 3 of our journey. I'm on the journey. I'm going to show you guys some of the content that I want to take the organization on next. So I'm going to give you a preview where we're headed. But you can say it's essentially federated data governance, where you bring in the business into the supply chain of products. I love the fact this morning, if you went into the keynote this morning, they talked about the rise of the data product and the importance of that data product being sort of that abstraction layer between the physical data state. So the things like the OEM, OEXOE asset, or DBO underscore VW underscore Git underscore, foo. How many times do you have seen a data asset like that? That's what the scan shows, but that doesn't mean anything. Business people can't use those types of things. And so this is the part about engendering the rest of the business to help us understand what those data assets are. And so that's our next phase of our journey. But there's a couple learnings along the way that I wanted to share with you. And my intent of sharing these with you today are simply, if there's anyone this can help accelerate their data governance journey, I did my job. So battle scars that I share here are for you to admire and hopefully avoid. One of them along the way was for an organization that doesn't understand data governance, I offer that evidence is the key. You have to have evidence of the problem at scale to get people to get it. That was the example. The data issues weren't enough. That was part of the problem. But then I had to scan the entire data state and show everybody's asset in the organization is unhealthy, or in some cases, some of them are very healthy. But hey, that's great. And we could play gamification and say, why can't you all be green like Kathleen? Second thing I learned along the way was measuring the problem at scale requires some sort of scanning on automation investment. A small but mighty data governance office, I had 5 people. And you're like, okay, so we probably have 60 million assets at Microsoft in the data state. How on earth would I be able to manage 60 million assets? I just want to know who the owner is. So the big part of that journey was being able to understand and measuring problem scales. Just let's scan it so that we can at least start identifying actions. third on the list, and probably the single most important thing I did in that phase 2 journey, was creating the data health scorecard, or scorecarding health, to go playing from defense to playing offense, to sit there and say, hey, look, this is what the health of the data is going to be. And I had defined a set of controls and terms that said things like, you didn't have an owner, you don't have metadata assigned. I eventually changed it to you have to have 2 different terms assigned to every single asset. You have to have you have to have a good description. The asset OEM OEXOE. There's a true story. We had an asset called, this is the asset OEM OEXOE. How is that helpful to anybody? But people would game the system because they first started with, we need to have an asset name with 10 characters. Then we moved it to 25 characters. We moved to 50 characters. And engineers, being clever like they are, will figure out how to gamify it. And so this is where, and you'll see it later around AI for data management comes into play, because I was sick and tired of playing that game with people, because I want to make the data either understandable for the organization to use, again, for those 10,000 people I talked about earlier. And then this last one, number 4, just because you do the first step and you do 3 and you manage your data state, the key then would be is connecting the business up to the actual physical data state, and that's the next step of our journey. And that's a big learning I have. That's actually very hard, because it actually requires experiences tailored for the business that isn't natural as part of the normal scanning strategy that we employed originally. Make sense? So with that, let me just offer that if there's one thing I was going to leave with you today, for those teams right now that are maybe in the journey that I started, which is all about defense, is the importance of shifting left into responsible offense. And it's common, and we did the same thing too, which is the right-hand side about data governance was originally about defense. It was about understanding, uncontrolled access to data or standing access to data, one of my banes of my existence, standing access to data. That means the data someone has access to it forever. That's a bad thing. That's all good. Understanding lineage is a data tag with PII information, but that's not enough, because the data governance office eventually get to the point, I got asked this question, what value do you guys bring? Especially as the down economy started happening, it comes like, do we need you? Do you need to exist? Which caused us to pivot to the left-hand side around, how do we actually start achieving value from our data? And that's a big, big, big part of the journey, where it's about balancing both. Shifting left is a critical part of our journey along the way. And what I mean by shifting left is all about health, literacy, quality, access. That's the stuff I was talking about with health. Imagine an ability to be, in addition to the risk management side, being able to understand, anyone across the company can understand the data. They can actually see who owns it. They can actually understand the scores of the data. You can right-click, get access to data. Now, right-click, get access doesn't mean you access the data. You kick off a workflow to ask the people. But instead of putting that stuff in email, instead of actually doing the phone tag conversation, which happened all the time at the company, let's put it into a central place, and so that engineers, which is the predominant number of people at the company right now, have a simple, when I say simple, like in 20 seconds you can go fill out this information, so you can actually connect with the person who owns the data that you probably don't know and you've never met at Microsoft, too big of a company. And so you create that sort of that exchange. That's what I mean by enabling this responsible offense. There's also ability to be able to profile the data and give the scores of that data. Very simple data quality score, so people can understand, self-understand, fit for use. One of the other lessons learned I did along the way, I actually tried scoring data quality originally, literally like grades, A, B, C, D, E, F. Big mistake. And what I learned was beauty's in the eye of the beholder. An A for somebody else is an F for somebody else. And so instead, we took a step back and we said, I'm just going to give the scores, and I'm going to make that available in the catalog. And so that's what and so they can self-decide. And so that's what I mean by responsible offense. Get that out into the hands of the business. And so just a little bit lower, and what I mean by that, and this is the next evolution of our phase here, is around connecting the data estate with the business. You can actually do that today, but what I mean by that is there's the physical data estate, which technical people kind of know, which is great. But the businesses always talk to me, and I would have data stewards at our company. They wouldn't be called data stewards, but they'd be like a finance manager. Say, you don't have anything for me. I don't know how to manage this. Give me the rules, tools, and schools, Damon, for us to be able to manage our data estate. And so that leads us to that third phase, where it's how about we provide a capability that allows the business to describe their business in their terms. We use OKRs at the company. So what are your key metrics? What are your business processes? What are the business documents? These are things that they understand. They don't know OEM, OEXOE. And then we actually had an experience where they can define their domains. They can define their data products. And then even better, we can do that. Now that we have generative AI, we can actually do that in a way where the AI can inform the data management process and help us create these types of terms. And so you can create things like, what are the list of domains for a marketing, or it's a list of terms for a marketing domain. If you actually ask ChatGPT that, it comes up with a 75% correct list. Imagine being able to do that in all these types of experiences. I'm actually explain more in a second here what I mean by that. But the key is to think about putting this next phase about the business in the middle. It's about engaging those people, and especially if you have a small enterprise data governance office, you actually have to offload a bunch of the work to the data stewards in the organization, not just access, but also describing the data. What is the data? It's an offering to the company. I love the word that the gentleman used this morning. The data product is an offering to the company, so let's actually define what that offering is. Let's have an owner for it, because it's not the same thing that's in the physical data state. They are different things. Big lesson learned for me along the way. So imagine, oops, wrong button. So what I'm going to show you here is just picture speaks 1,000 words. I want to show you kind of where I want to head in the organization. This is where I'm actually asking the Purview product engineering team. Obviously, you can imagine, I'm a Purview user. I'm a user, not the engineering team, but where I want to take the product and where I think that at the end of the day, everyone in the every one of these products in the company or in the world can go. So imagine an experience here where data governance is an accelerator for responsible offense. And imagine, as an example, I could go to a catalog and ask something as simple as, back to the 10,000 data scientists, I want to understand the S500. At Microsoft, we have a terms called S100 and S500. I mean, strategic accounts, strategic 100, strategic 500. Super common word, but you won't find that in the physical data estate. Can we define a product that does that? Better yet, it recognizes, based on my role as a data analyst, the scenarios I'm a set of data analysts, it recognizes I probably want highly curated data sets. I probably don't want to see the actual raw data. I want to see the actual data products or maybe even Power BI models. It knows that. And then on the right-hand side, imagine this Copilot. We use Copilots at Microsoft, or some sort of AI that comes back in the data management experience says, are you trying to get access to this data? Can I go ahead and help you fill out this request? And it can fill out things like who the manager is. It can actually auto-generate the description of what my use case would be. These are things that are possible. You can give it a prompt and they can actually fill out all the information for you. Imagine an experience to be able to do that. That's what we're talking about, wrapping in the business and making this business-friendly experience. Now I'm going to go to the other side and say, imagine the data management experience. So this is for the data stewards that are out there. Imagine an experience that also uses natural language as the language of data governance for something like, what are my actions today? Imagine I'm a steward in HR. What am I supposed to go do in my data state? It could go tell me, you have 17 data access requests we need you to review and approve or deny. I'm okay with people denying access requests. You have a set of new data assets that your IT partner added to the data state. What do you want to do with them? Do you want to map them to a physical data offering back to the data product thing? Do you want to hide that? It should even be discoverable. These are the things the data stewards today don't know. And if we could get that type of experience in front of them where you have AI-driven, steward-in-the-loop sets of processes, this would make it so the engagement with the data steward community would be way better than what I have today. And even better, I will go even farther to say controls. Like data governance office, it's very obvious. We all start with controls. CDMC has a set of 14 controls. DAMA has sets of controls. Everybody's got controls. I talked about controls earlier. Why do I have to go tell the software what the controls are? Why can't it come with a set of default sets of controls? Like every asset's got an owner. Everyone knows that needs to do that. Why can't we go ahead and add those to our sets of capabilities? And that's what I mean by the future of where we're headed with the sets of products. This is what I can promise you as an ambassador to every one of you in the room right now. This is where I'm trying to take our data governance offices. We're trying to take our products and our services. And I really think this is sort of, we're on the dawn of the next evolution of data governance and the tools that support it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thank you so much. So I'll just, I guess I'll just echo what Damon was saying, that it's a pretty exciting time to be in data governance because there is this obvious quantum leap that we are going to be going through. I have the luxury of a couple of things. Number one, working pretty closely with Microsoft on their internal data governance journey, but also collaborating with our co-customers in giving a bit more of a breadth across the industry. And I mean, from this, we kind of took, I guess, a survey and a poll of the kind of companies we're talking with, and it's not unheard of us hearing things like this in the current experiences that are leading to these types of discussions of where this needs to go. Just things like searching for data within my estate, coming back with files. In some cases, it might be thousands and thousands of files just for an input of the word customer. We've all seen it, right? Just things like this. Who really wants to be able to manually fill out descriptions of metadata and things like this? And I'll just fast track through these for everyone. Even finding out who is the actual best owner for a domain within the business. It's harder actually to actually achieve this, easier said than done. applying policies when all I have is files and tables. And these are just some of the complexities. Now, who in the room, I'm going to use my words carefully here, who wants to be an expert on GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, PCI, DSS? That's very different from saying who is or who has to. And these are some of the proactive pieces that Damon is talking about. Is, companies like Microsoft are fantastic at regulation and compliance. And how can we be much more proactive about helping solve the defensive parts that we all need to do? We all want to be compliant. We all want to follow the rules. There's no one in the room that would negate that. But at the cost of not focusing on the offensive parts, which is much more where the revenue generating and exciting pieces are. So these are just some of the items that often come up when talking with our customers. But here's the exciting part. These are all things that where Microsoft's taking their journey will start to be solved. So these things will be something of the past, and these are the common pains that are hitting all of us. So for me, the future is bright. And like Damon was saying, we get this ability to kind of give you an idea of where this is going and what it might look like. So it starts with this, being so much more proactive in the data governance space. Damon gave the example of scanning systems. So finding data sets for you instead of being a general register to find and register your assets. This is one way of being proactive. But even with the regulatory and compliance pieces, to be able to do so much more upfront work for you to make sure that you're focusing much more on the offensive pieces. And this is all about also when we're bringing the business into this supply chain, it's about being in the tools they're already working in. And this could be in the face of a Copilot, it could be in the face of a Teams, it could be in Excel. Wherever the business is using, our job is to abstract away the underlying complexities, like the files and the systems and the SAP column names and table names that Damon was talking about. That's what's going to shift this closer to the right, where the business is sitting there waiting to play a role. And we'll go into this a little bit later, but AI will play a significant role in this. I think it's quite ironic in a way that a lot of the reasons why we're all investigating this data governance is because our AI, our machine learning, and our BI projects didn't actually really go well. Because we didn't identify we have this lack of foundation in place to fuel those things and have them run in production. And now we're back where I can tell you we cannot do this properly without the use of some types of heuristic models, in this case, large language models. And the metadata that we're all capturing in these proactive systems is going to help drive the context behind delivering more nuanced use of the generative AI as well. And all this leads to this, shifting the discussion away from assets, files, and tables and systems to the right, where we're talking about business domains. And this is the gap and the chasm that exists in our technology stacks today. Damon highlighted at the top of the iceberg, they're pretty IT-driven and IT-implemented parts of our stack. 100% necessary, our lakes, our lake houses, and our warehouses, but it's that underneath of the iceberg, there's the foundation that needs to be put in place so we can survive the entropy of a business. And so this is easier said than done. Moving from assets to domains is hard, and it requires a couple of things. Number one, you can imagine that the data we have on our customers could sit across multiple files, multiple tables, and multiple systems. So it's about shifting the discussion into one consolidated view of that. This is something that this is not new. We've been wanting to do this for so long, and so it's probably good to identify what's changed in the market that suddenly makes this more possible to achieve. Those of you who have worked on these projects before, you'll realize that actually the true nature of data only starts to show itself, its true knowledge itself, when we start to bring it together. We could have the most perfect operational data in each of our systems, but when it comes together, that's when it really starts to show its issues. So moving the discussion away from assets and into domains will start to involve the business and allow us for the business and by the business. One of the other truisms working with our customers with Microsoft and CluedIn, I can guarantee you this, data does not stitch together in the same way. It won't today, and it won't ever in the future. And there's current changes in the market that have allowed this, but it requires us to take the discussion to the next level. And it's not just about looking at data at a global asset level, it's about going down to the record level and coming the way back up as well. And also, this would be an additional point, that data doesn't overlap in the same way. So there's no conformed model that will be able to rule all our data that will fit today and fit in the future. So what has changed to make this a reality? Well, with a lot of the good discussions that I've been having with attendees here at CDOIQ, the market has evolved. A lot of us are to the point where our data estate is getting more mature, whether we like to admit it or not. A lot of the discussions I was having today, people are at least have a strategy or even have in place catalogues to understand what data they have. That's much better than where we were 5 years ago. And what it's helped us realize is, what's the next evolution? And it's to move the discussion into business domains and to serve these up, to Damon's point, as data products that can be consumed with all the necessary services around it for it to survive. A good analogy I always like to use here, or an example, is how we consume Netflix. I think everyone would probably agree that the main value of Netflix is the content. It's the TV shows, it's the movies. But if we didn't have the button on all of our remote controls and a good SLA and a good recommendation system, that's probably questionable by many people, then it would not be the product that we use. So this is the same analogy we can start to apply to data, that yes, data is where the true value is, but without providing those other services around it, it will not survive. One other evolution of where we're thinking is modeling. So to put things in perspective, there is a part of the IT, the supply chain of data, that is very much focused on being driven via IT and engineering, and that won't go away. But a new part of that supply chain, where we start to involve business users, of course, this is where it's going. And for that, the same typical modeling we're used to in IT will not be the same modeling we'll be doing in the business. And this is where the semantic modeling piece comes in. Because in semantic modeling, we're not talking about primary keys and foreign keys and inner joins and outer joins. We're talking about describing the relationships that exist between data. Customer, purchased, product. And this will be the modeling that will be given to the business to be able to consume that data, abstracting away the complexity. So this is this abstraction that we've all really realized, and the progression of where Microsoft's going as well. I'd prefer to be able to browse domains instead of assets, files, and tables. And there was one particular technology that was 100% necessary to make this possible, and that's the use of graph. And I specifically call this out because to solve this challenge of moving assets into domains, there is a need to actually go down to the resolution at a record level and not just stay at the meta level. The reason why comes back to that previous slide. Data does not fit together in the same way. It won't today, and it won't in the future. So the ability to have more flexible modeling that's much more about identifying the links instead of putting rigid expectations up front on the data is absolutely key to the success of this. So with all this in mind, what's the big thing that has changed? Well, the introduction of large language models has been significant. I come back to my point, how there's this flywheel approach that we need data governance to do AI, and without any doubt, we need AI to do proper data governance. And to make this work, we've also had the fortune of working with our joint customers for the last 3 months in production with customers using the Azure OpenAI pieces. And what we identified was really the main key things that needed to be put in place for this to survive the operations of a business, but to run in a production environment. The other thing that it can be used for is that proactiveness that we're talking about. that upfront security and compliance and governance pieces that we can throw at assets and start to understand a lot of these things by analysing the data for you instead of such a prescriptive, manual, human-driven approach to these things we all know we need to do, but are time-consuming and complex to keep up with. So we identified 4 main pillars that were 100% necessary to get the use of the large language models running in production in data governance use cases. The first was the guardrails. This was the ability at scale to be able to short circuit and answer back from the large language models. And this is much harder than you would think is to do. We've all probably got to the point where we're using these tools in anger right now, and you'll know that a lot of the time the prompt response is that it's always 100% confident with its answer. Well, that's not deterministic. And to get it to an actual state where you can do that is quite complex, but it's on us as vendors to be able to solve that part for you. The other bit was attribution. And think about the way that we talk with each other as humans. If there is something at the dinner table that's discussed and I don't agree, what's the approach I do to figure out where they're coming from? I ask, where did you get your sources from? And the more reputable sources I get it from, the more likely I'm to agree with them, but there'll always be this factor of risk. This is not a deterministic tool we're talking with, it's a heuristic tool. So it's really about setting the expectations, and I think Eric from Microsoft said it best before when I was talking to him, you have to set the expectations, this will get things wrong. How much are you willing to accept the guardrails that are put around it that you won't capture every single possible issue? And the fact is, you won't, especially if you're wanting to do this at scale. Obviously, the sovereignty and the privacy piece, this is a big topic, but I can, hopefully without getting too much trouble, I can say that the Azure OpenAI pieces, this is more of a, I would say this is just more of a guarantee from them, that none of the stuff that you use to prompt will ever be fed back into a base model. It's hosted in your environment, there's no caching or anything like this. This is still a worry for a lot of companies, but you're seeing a lot of companies spawn up and just focus on the sovereignty piece, but this is something that Microsoft already does pretty well. And then finally was the explainability. And this is one of the best things that these large language models do. One of the cases of common for CluedIn is to be able to build a single view of anything, whether that's a customer or a product. And one of those pieces is figuring out if you've got duplicate records. Now, in the past, before large language models, you had to provide these complex scores of why these 2 records merged or didn't. Now you can ask these large language models to explain in natural language exactly why it decided to merge 2 records together. Even something as simple as saying, Alex is the nickname of Alexander, so I decided to actually treat that as the same person, right? So you can get full explanation. This is necessary to involve the business. Anything else stays in IT and engineering. That's why it hasn't moved out until this point. Okay, so we talk about, we're probably all going to go home and say, I've heard a lot about these certain topics and this is what we need to go off and execute. And I like to kind of play through what happens if we actually put this all in play. So if we've suddenly got this utopian environment where we've got business domains easily served up to the business, what's actually going to happen? Now, there's lots of good examples I could give, and feel free to join us out at our booth to step through the details, but I'd like to keep it kind of higher level of, all right, when these business users are in the data supply chain, what's magical things are going to happen that IT and engineering can't solve? And for me, it's about the persona. Myself, I come from a software engineering background, and when I'm building systems, I'm thinking about, do they connect? Do I have proper logging? Were there failures? Do I handle them? Is the integration reliable? I'm not thinking about how do I make more revenue streams off that data. And that is the value of bringing the business into the supply chain. They have a different way of thinking. They're focused on how could I use this data and identify, maybe by enriching from Dun & Bradstreet or something like this. If I have that extra data, I can build new revenue streams, build new products. It's the persona that we're introducing that is the biggest win to come from this. And so it's always a good idea to ask yourself the question, is this next evolution, are we setting ourselves up for a big disappointment? Because we've gone through all these iterations. We're always moving the needle. And the answer is there'll always be a way to move the needle. The difference here being recently that the large language model introductions is a leap. It's not a needle move. It is a leap. And that's the exciting part, and that's definitely where Microsoft is embracing and going as well. So I'll finish with this slide, and then we'll open up for some questions. I've kind of been given the fortune of, on behalf of Microsoft, talking about kind of the predictions of where this will go as well. And we've talked about a couple of these already. But number one is that the tight integration between the business and the IT stack, that will become more consolidated, right? So IT and business will play a more aligned and integrated role in the supply chain of data, right? It doesn't mean things will be replaced. We're filling voids and chasms that exist. And the biggest chasm that exists today is that these things are still too buried in IT and engineering. And Damon alluded to some of these, but even some of these discussions we're having with the customers, where we're talking about Parquet files and CSV, this is not ready for the business. Our job is to move to the right and make the data ready to be consumed by the business. So this will be consumed in the form of business domains. The next thing is that without a doubt, the use of large language models will be 100% necessary to solve this problem. And it's really about all the problems that can't be codified and deterministically solved. A good example would be detecting PII data. There's very well-known engineering techniques to detect a credit card. But what if the credit card is missing one number? What if the credit card is formatted differently? What if we're trying to identify job titles? There's no pattern to a job title. This helps us fill this void, lower the risk, and also, in some cases, augment or automate the experience as well. And that semantic modeling will essentially be the modeling for the business users. It won't change what IT do with their tables and IDs and foreign keys and things like that. That is targeted at that persona, and that still exists and is still deterministic and still works. But later down the supply chain, there's a new need for a different type of modeling that fits the persona. That is where the semantic modeling piece comes in. So with that, I think Damon and I would be open to any questions, maybe about even further predictions on where things are going or particulars that you've seen, but I'll hand back to the room.
Thank you, Tim and Damon. I think great points you brought up. And since morning, we have been listening a lot about data products, empowering the business users, and love the point which you brought up in terms of how can you accelerate the ability to experiment, innovate, and open new lines of revenue from the business side. Mm. Now, one of the points that you also mentioned is many of these capabilities are deep rooted in the IT side.
Yeah.
And moving from all the way from the left, that's IT, into the business on the right, there'll be a lot of tensions.
Yes.
So do you see, what type of tensions do you see, and how is this whole evolution gonna happen? Because I think IT side, typically there are some constraints, there are some worries, they don't understand the data, they want to protect it. Less risk, right? They want to manage the risk.
It's a great question.
Exactly.
So it's funny and ironic. Damon's correct when he corrected me on this, but my last slide was actually on challenges. Mm-hmm. And the first one was about how is IT going to feel about this, right? And how you bridge that back in. Damon did the right thing and said, don't leave them with challenges. So I appreciate that. But it was the number one challenge was that suddenly you're going to have this IT team that are codifying everything, making everything automatically deployable and tested and deterministic. And suddenly you're introducing this operational system that's going to have faults and human faults to it. Even the large language models are going to come back with things. And is my IT team going to sit there and going, I'm not going to pull those changes in because I can control this? And that's very uncontrollable in a way. It's a challenge. For me, it's about making it absolutely so seamless that it doesn't become and seen as an obstruction to the IT and engineering team, because naturally that's probably one of the first things they're going to think is, how are you going to ruin my day with what I've set up? That will be a huge challenge. It'll be up to the vendors to be able to solve that in a really transparent way. That comes around the workflow processes and things like this, but it also comes back to the realization IT and engineering don't own it. The business own it. But we've been stuck in these days of it's still in IT and it's still in engineering. For good reason, because we're still solving this part of the stack. But now we're all starting to realize as we're maturing, now's the time, and that's who should really own it. So that would, I don't know if you want to add anything, Damon, but.
No, I think your point around that, I'm expecting, use the word vendors, I'm expecting, in my case, Microsoft, I'm expecting us to be able to bridge that IT business gap with things like automated alerting and things like it says there's a data asset that's just been basically brought into your data estate or your domain, and we think it's your domain. Do you want to go ahead and register this? Let me register it for you. It's that kind of stuff to make it more seamless. It happens today. It happens haphazardly over email. Maybe there's a phone call. You go to a meeting and you get surprised. So the idea about bringing that together in a more streamlined way, I think, is the spot on point, and I'm excited to see that happen. When we have at a company like Microsoft, where you're talking tens of thousands of people that actually have that exchange every single day, it's necessary. There's a lot of money involved in that.
Great, great. Actually, it totally makes sense, but I think it also leads to change in the data culture, data awareness, literacy around data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the finger pointing thing I was talking about earlier.
Exactly. So there's a lot of interest in this particular session. We have about 300 participants, so great. I'll open the questions to the audience. Anyone? Questions?
Or online.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question. On the semantic modeling, do you see that as a advancement in terms of data fluency for the business back to the old 20 years ago traditional conceptual logical modeling, and kind of a heyday for that to come back in terms of semantic modeling?
In very short, yes. Like, to be not verbose, yes. And for me, it's just the right abstraction level that makes it. There's still complexity with it, but it also spawns from the fact the realization you will never have this one operational model that all of your data will fit into, but you will have these semantics that are traded between different models, right? And I think of it more as this Rosetta Stone between the metadata, and it's just much more approachable by non-technical people. And so, but short answer is yes.
Because it's interesting, they're not actually teaching that at the university level. It's almost like a lost art.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that conversation has been, at least within the shops I've been in, how do you bring that back? In the shop I'm in, we actually refer to it as a vignette. We don't even call it logical modeling or anything like that, just because for the business to understand it, and they clearly do, but that's an area that we need to advance.
Agreed.
In a simple way.
So we have a question from online. What tips and tricks do you have to change the narrative regarding business value that data governance can deliver?
Can you repeat the
you say it
first
again?
part of that question?
What tips and tricks
Yeah.
do you have to change the narrative regarding the business value that data governance can deliver?
Right.
Tips and tricks for understanding data value.
But also, I guess, just selling that to the business of what is the value of investing in this?
Well, yeah, I can speak from my experience. One of the things I had to do, one tip and trick technique that I found super valuable was I ended up embracing Six Sigma, and that metrics that matter and leading indicators and lagging indicators is sort of the language I spoke with the business with. I found that important. I had 9 or 10 master black belts that kind of would help me identify some weird esoteric thing in a metric and convert that into something that was valuable that they could understand. So as an example, we had one, there was a metric, and even the term trying to understand pay partner accurately. And that was something that this particular group did that helped me understand with the fishbone diagrams. And I had never done that root cause analysis before myself. I found that super valuable as a way to communicate with the business. The other one that was a tip and trick was to help. We ended up identifying almost like chevrons, business process flows, and we always had a standard template for how our business model worked. And I would explain to people to say things like the root cause of the problem is over here in this particular chevron. and way over here, it manifests itself over here. And so I was able to help, I think it helped the executives understand the, basically between the chevrons, and sometimes there were 24 or 25 chevrons in totality, to say, this is where the fractured experience exists, and it goes between, sales and marketing, or marketing and finance, or finance and HR, and so forth. That was certainly one thing I learned. The downside will be as you get into the whack-a-mole program that I talked about earlier, but that may be a perfectly fine scenario for people. That was one thing I didn't share that I think would be a tip and a trick. Trying to think of like with the data products. The other one would be if, the way at least I see it, you set up a data product that needs to anchor to something that the business can recognize. So having, whether you use objectives and key results, or whether you use metrics, being able to say, as part of the attribution of defining a data product or the offering we have the organization, this metric powers this power metric that is on our CFO's dashboard. Be able to understand that and be able to, so that people can say, what's this thing for? You can sit there and say, we've already annotated that. I didn't define it, the business did that. They said this thing powers the Azure consumed revenue or the Azure churn metric here. Mic drop. I don't get a whole lot of pushback when I say that.
Thanks, Rob. Just a question on the quality of data in your data products and governance. How do you see that the business is consuming their data product, but how does quality get built in and all the way through that supply chain, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's really important in organizations to define what they mean by data quality. There's industry terms. I was one of the very, very first standards we created was the data quality standard, because everyone would argue about this asset doesn't have enough quality. And we're like, well, they're talking about something else like balancing controls, or it wasn't about something like it's missing records or you're missing this one column. So defining those things, I think, is super important. The one thing I learned along the way is as you think about when you scan your entire data estate, it's really difficult to get, I would say, a set of data quality controls that work for everyone. So I would offer creating common controls that apply to every data asset. So whether you scan a data lake over here or over there, apply the same sets of rules, and then getting your business data stewards back into the business, getting them to define their domain-specific data rules, data quality rules, so that you can then use that and build that into the scan of their local systems, allows us basically to elevate. I've got standards for standards for data quality that are enterprise, and I got local ones. So in this particular case, I have 3 standards I use at the company: validity, consistency, and uniqueness. And then like in the HR department, they have about 5 others that they use to be able to define their assets. Together, those 8 are what we'd call, for HR, that is the definition that goes of let's say, quality, and that's what gets hosted in our catalog.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I'll just add something from a different direction on that. A couple of good realizations we've seen work well for companies is that the fact that don't lock up data even though it's got these quality issues before getting it out to the business. This iterative approach is key. That's been hard in the past, because a lot of technologies have required, this is what it needs to look like, and until it looks like that, you can't move on. So it has required some agility, changing in the technology to allow that to happen. The other thing is, if we're talking about data products, if you're building a product, you have also things like roadmaps, where you know your tool's not perfect today, but you've got things coming up in the roadmap. With the quality pieces, exposing the fact that there are people that are working on this data set and trend lines that show the data quality moving in a certain direction, that's also what allows you to adopt data when it's not in a perfect state. I mean, won't be in a perfect state, and bring that agility back to the quality. So no matter what metrics you're actually choosing, I think embrace it as an iterative process, right? Now, there's a funny thing that happens in reality when you do that. And this might not be ubiquitous across all businesses. I think maybe it was brought up in a discussion that I had today with someone as well, was that then people start to gravitate towards the data sets that are of high, pristine quality and stay away from the ones that need a little bit more work, right? So there is a bit of a sales piece to it as well. And that's why I think we'll see people like product managers that own data sets. And their job is to proliferate it and provide roadmaps around it and foresee that roadmap through, including data quality increasing as well.
I think that's the essence of data product management. When you think about data products,
Yeah, I think it's that.
attribution. Coming from a software company right now, if you think about software products, they've got a check-in, check-out process. There's a code management process. There's controls. We treat software as an asset. Why don't we treat data as an asset? They need to have the exact same. It's a different set of controls, but the exact same metaphor. I use that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Less a question, more an observation. I find it sad after 50 years that the physical bit of this, what you just talked about as IT, whether it's CSV or relational database or whatever, isn't doing anything on the semantics. And there are standards. There's CSV on the web as an example that allows you to connect the semantics to the data. And I worry that if we keep applying the semantics over the top, you'll constantly have this drift that as the underlying physical schema changes, you'll be playing catch up all the time.
You will be. So this is probably a bad analogy for the room, but it's one I know well, is that it's very similar to what we do in producing software, is we have parts where we need to merge changes together and resolve conflicts. And it will be exactly the same. And this is how products will be produced. You will publish a product, especially in a federated data governance environment, and it will say, I've run the pre-checks. Because you're working in your isolated domain, you'll break that and that and that if you publish. So there's impact analysis. For me, it's the same as conflict resolution in source code. It won't go away. The job is to simplify it for an audience, but they'll still have to do these change management pieces. It's on us to make it simple. It will not go away.
So there's another question from online. How should CDOs and data leaders respond to business stakeholders who resist change? And I think this is a big one because on one side there's a worry about losing ownership. The other side it's taking up a lot more responsibility and the risk that comes with it. So
Yeah, it's a great question. It keeps me up at night all the time. You have to, and I didn't invent this, so this is some of the talks that were talked about at the keynote yesterday. What's in it for them? What's in it for these different businesses to be able to get for resistance? The way, when I rolled out data governance at Microsoft, I went business by business and tried to understand back to that metrics that matter, that accrued to that business person's outcome, whether it was an employee experience and manager success rate, which is an HR thing, versus sales and trying to figure out customer churn and so forth. Totally different sets of metrics. I think it's super important if you go business by business, you understand their metrics, go basically meet them when they're at and help them understand this stuff right here that's preventing you from being successful basically fixes or affects your outcome. Going in there and explaining, I'm not saying people do this, but going in there and saying, we should do data governance, which is the way I started, and here's the top-down thing. We set up a set of data stewards, and we should assign data stewards across the organization. You kind of like, but what problem are you solving? If you start with a problem and you help them identify where that is, was a way to help break down the barriers. That's what I had to do that's why the data issues came there. I had to bring the whole organization along to sit there and say, this stuff exists over here and here and here and here and here. And people eventually saw the pattern and they go, okay, I give up.
yeah, it's definitely like when it's within a business, it's easier. Means what personally I have experienced is when data is being used across business units, and one can resist, another is open, it becomes a bit more challenging. So having a common North Star, a use case which can prove a success definitely works. Means, have you also seen something similar when data is being used across domains, across business units?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You have data products that are designed to be intra-department, and then you put them in a catalog, and all of a sudden they're being used inter-department, and the SLAs that were perfectly fine for that one department don't meet the needs of the next department. And how do you elevate those things? Goes back to, at least what I found, what goes back to I articulate the outcomes, like why does it matter? And then help people understand. It says, look, this is affecting something. And if it doesn't meet the needs, there's an argument that says maybe there's some of those data products, when you think about back to the defining the offering to the company, this is an offering only for one group. You need to describe that and tell people so that people don't accidentally say, well, I just used it to power this big, huge thing and you're not willing to, or are unable to. And to be fair to the teams, they might say, I'm not staffed to do what you're asking me to go do. And so maybe the right thing to go do is to, I use the word demote it from public use. But those are the types of things that become part of the business conversation, I think.
Any other question from the audience?
I just got a practical question about data ownership. When it comes to like customer throughout the life cycle, you know, you have different departments that would be considered more the owner of it in the current state. Like marketing would be at the beginning of the journey, sales, finance, support, etc. How did you tackle that challenge of a life cycle and the ownership of an object like customer?
And the hardest one being customer too. Yeah, and so we had that problem too. And what we ended up finding ourselves having to do is put a point person on top. And so we ended up assigning operations as sort of the steward across all the different processes. And it was a natural fit at Microsoft because it was the organization that found themselves having to stitch the customer across the board. So that was for us just the natural fit, like who has to solve this problem every single day? That's what we ended up doing. Product, it has that scenario for us. Employee doesn't. Is an interesting one because HR kind of self-contained, but we found that it's only been a handful of master data entities that run into that problem. And I actually end up having to position this all the way at the top of the organization. Says, well, here's the problems that exist because, like you said, the seams in the business processes right now, can we have someone own that? As the data governance leader right now, my job was to raise visibility that I wasn't there to solve the problem. And that's what I needed to go do to bring it to life. That's actually why, otherwise the data governance office can't scale.
So it's a business operations unit in between those departments, basically, across those departments.
Yeah, they're the organization that basically deals with all order management, and so they're the ones that go from prospect to, or at least see it going across the board. They're also the ones that track to see orphaned orders and orphaned prospects and so forth. And so they were sort of natural to fit into that. That was unique for our situation.
And that kind of evolves into a data product owner at that point too, because it's pretty similar.
Yeah, totally. And then they're naturally the person that we would say, well, since you've been doing this the most right now, what would you logically want to use to describe customer? And what are the data offerings that we have for the organization? And so they are actually super involved in creating that for the organization. They actually, interestingly enough, then we actually found them to be the right owner to own the master data problem for the customer too. And so then they staffed a whole organization. This is literally the evolution. You guys are seeing all the goo we went through, but they actually ended staffing their own organization that basically dealt with the requirements to go work with the vendor organizations to basically go build the merge purge logic. And so it was sort of natural to go in that direction. But that, what I'm describing right there was about a 3-year journey.
But actually, what your input is what it should be, is that there is no one owner. Right. It's a supply chain where there's different responsibilities along the chain. And when you start to work with records more at a granular level, you realize in the larger businesses, who's responsible for cleaning that data? Who's responsible for describing the data? There's a much more complex that doesn't just come into one central point. But from a data product owner perspective, that's more realistic that there would be. But actually, it's not more of a here's the owner, it's here's the supply chain and here's the responsibilities along that chain that it should be moving towards.
And that's the most complex one.
Yeah.
Great.
Every time?
Yeah. So thank you, Tim and Damon, for this. This is
bet.
a great.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you guys for your time. We'll be at the booth out there. I think it's out there in the hallway too. If you have any other questions, if you didn't feel we had time to ask questions, Tim and I will be out there, and we're happy to keep on going. Thank you.